Hi, I'm Cantor Austerklein, and this is the Lowell Milken Center for Music of American Jewish Experience. If you saw the recent Leonard Bernstein movie with Bradley Cooper, you would know that the great American Jewish composer was a uniquely talented man who wanted to have it all. Well, beyond his personal life, Leonard Bernstein wanted to have it all in music as well. So follow me through this short alternative biopic, and we'll take a look at Leonard Bernstein as the proud public Jew who infused so many of his famous American compositions with the Jewish music and sounds of the synagogue. Leonard Bernstein's grandfather Yudel was a Talmud scholar, and his father Samuel himself considered becoming a rabbi. But he ended up going into business, and instead of an immigrant-based Orthodox synagogue, he decided to go to congregation Mishkan Tefillah, part of an emerging new movement called conservative Judaism. Mishkan Tefillah had not only other more modern Jews in the business community, but also an organ, a European-trained cantor, and a choir of mixed male and female voices. Attending regularly with his father, young Bernstein fell in love with many aspects of the service: the rabbi's elocution, the cantor's singing, and the classically inflected Jewish choral music directed by Solomon Breslavsky, with whom Bernstein maintained a long friendship. Reflecting on the service growing up, Bernstein's sister Shirley said, "Lenny and I can still sing much of what we heard in those early years. Now we recognize the sounds of Giuseppe Verdi, Ernst Bloch, Modest Mussorgsky, Felix Mendelssohn, and Franz Schubert. When we first heard them, we thought it was all Professor Breslavsky." Jewishness became a simply inescapable part of Leonard Bernstein's public persona, an unfolding story. Though encouraged by his mentor Serge Koussevitzky to change his last name to Burns to be less Jewish, Bernstein refused. Following World War II, Bernstein came to Munich to conduct an orchestra of Holocaust survivors. Soon afterward, he went off to conduct the then Palestine Symphony Orchestra in Tel Aviv, and the next year returned to conduct an open-air concert in Beersheba during the Arab-Israeli War. These performances began a lifelong association with the Israel Philharmonic, for whom he composed special compositions and to which he returned as a guest conductor some 25 times, more than with any other orchestra. Jewish and religious themes were at the heart of so many of Bernstein's works. His first symphony, premiering in 1944, was called the Jeremiah Symphony, and uses two sets of Ashkenazi cantillations, or trope, as melodic material to explore the lament and disorientation of a world at war. His third symphony, called the Kaddish Symphony, focuses around the recitation of the Jewish morning prayer, the Kaddish, as the narrator struggles with God in an anxious world. Looking out at a world of nuclear threat, uncertainty, and global conflict, Bernstein was often returning to Jewish subjects in order to explore in music how humanity should face itself. He often spoke of God in his works in a classic Jewish way, with both sweet idealism and great struggle. Bernstein even succeeded in making one piece of iconic Jewish music even more Jewish than before. In 1960, Bernstein was tasked with recording the Bloch Sacred Service, the first ever full classical music setting of the synagogue liturgy. In a change which infuriated the composer's daughter, Bernstein changed one of the final movements, exchanging a chanted meditation for a rabbinic narrator and the traditional recitation of the Jewish morning prayer, the Kaddish. This made the piece, ultimately, sound more like a real service. Whereas the composer Bloch was far more ambivalent about his Judaism and stylized his work when it came to its religiosity, Bernstein was a proud Jew and couldn't help but make the piece a bit more like the real synagogue life that he had deeply experienced and cherished. But Bernstein's Jewish side also made it into more popular fare. Let's just name a few. Remember West Side Story? Well, it was first conceived of as East Side Story, about a forbidden romance between rival gangs of Catholics and Jews. Bernstein wrote Jewish-related materials into Candide, into his ballet, The Dybbuk, based on the Yiddish story, and even inserted Hebrew lines into his Mass. And his Hebrew language Chichester Psalms have become the one Hebrew choral work that has become an indelible part of the modern canon of choral music. Leonard Bernstein was special because he was proudly Jewish. Though not traditionally religious, his Jewishness was a bold part of his public persona and compositional output, as well as his philosophy of life. And he wielded it not only as part of his voice in music, but his voice in American life. Following the death of President Kennedy, Bernstein made these remarks. America's leadership must be guided by learning and reason. Learning and reason, precisely the two elements that were necessarily missing from the mind of anyone who could have fired that impossible bullet. Learning and reason, the two basic precepts of all Judaistic tradition, the twin sources from which every Jewish mind, from Abraham and Moses to Freud and Einstein, has drawn its living power. Learning and reason, the motto we here tonight must continue to uphold with redoubled tenacity, and must continue at any price to make the basis of all our actions. This gets to, I think, another important side of Bernstein. Not just the musical side, but the rabbinic side. Recalling the rabbi of his youth, H. Rabinowitz, who wrote his recommendation to Harvard, Bernstein remarked, quote, "He gave me my first notion of public speaking, of declamatory passion and timing, a sense of balance and moderation in reasoning, a liberal view of argument, an enormous sense of dignity, and the basic divine element in man." End quote. If you look at Bernstein's symphonies, Mass, and other works, and even his changes to the Bloch Sacred Service, these belie, in my opinion, an almost rabbinic style of communication. With his other pursuits as a classical music educator, famous for his young people's concerts, it's fruitful to see Bernstein as a sort of rabbinic moralist, using both music and Jewishness to communicate important values to his fellow Americans. For Leonard Bernstein, having it all meant in all aspects of his identity, including, in his own words, to be a proud and grateful American, but also a proud and grateful Jew. I'm Cantor Matthew Austerklein, and thank you for watching the Milken Center for Music of American Jewish Experience.